Hello, welcome to New York Truck Stop Video, the voice of small business in New York, presented by NewYorkTruckStop.com and the law office of Arthur Miller. I'm Zach Miller.
And I am Arthur Miller. Thanks for joining us. Today we're recording. It's Tuesday, the 19th of May. So thank you for being with us.
Always important to keep that calendar date, so you don't lose track of that.
Especially working from home, and myself and many others are saying that you almost forget what day it is or what time it is. So, very hard to stay on schedule. So
it's so true. But
we're doing
it's
a
funny.
public service here.
Oh yes, exactly. That's us. That's 100% us. Although you did touch on a couple of things that we are going to be talking about today. Vis-a-vis the work from home model, public services,
and staying on time.
Exactly. So I do want to say, though, that this last week, Saturday, on our radio show, New York Truck Stop Radio, Saturdays, 1 p.m., AM 970, The Answer, AM 570, The Mission. Arthur and I talked about...
And the MP3 is on our website.
There you go. You beat me to it. Because Arthur and I talked about the MTA, that's the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, or what's the fun?
The money-taking administration?
Money-taking administration. So that's what Arthur and I talked about on Saturday, about all the decades of corruption, mismanagement, incompetence that led to a fiscal cliff, so to speak, before COVID-19. And then COVID-19 just, pardon the pun, but took it off the rails, or derailed the authority. And now there's a very bleak future out there for the MTA. Saturday's show, we talked about mostly how they got there. We offered a little bit of solutions for them moving forward, but we thought today would be a great opportunity to expand on that and talk about what the MTA should be doing moving forward to make sure that that they maintain relevancy, and so that New York City and its surrounding suburbs still have a viable, safe, reliable public transportation system.
So here are
go ahead,
give you
please.
Some of our prescriptions for how to fix the MTA and mass transit. But before we get into that, though, one of the problems is the classic definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome each time. And if you look, both the Governor Cuomo and Mayor De Blasio, they appoint all these committees and task forces, and there are a lot of the same groups that brought us to the situation where we were overextended and over tapped out, and the structure that led to the pandemic being so bad in the New York metropolitan area. So to have the same people that had the same goals, that are trying to help, quote unquote, re-envision the future of New York, that want to re-envision it in a way that works for them to try to maintain that status quo. I think that's only a recipe for cementing in or locking down some of the same problems that we had before. So I think we have some other solutions, and let's get into it.
Yeah. So let's just one quick thing. So one of the, I think two of the biggest issues with the MTA is the overwhelming amount of debt that they carry. It was about $38 billion before COVID, billion. So, a fortune in debt that they carry. And also the business model. You're talking about a very Manhattan-centric model. Basically, all the subway lines run through Manhattan. It's all about getting people, people from the outer boroughs if they're lucky, and then people from a little bit further out of the central core into the central core of Manhattan. That business model is gone. COVID wiped it out, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But to that end, it's like, well, what's the new way of thinking? The new way of thinking has to be a completely new business model, which is Um, and this is something that Arthur's been talking about for years, and I'll let him get to it. But this is more like new downtowns, local. You know, your community, your downtown. You have your mixed buildings. You have homeowners, not just renters, but homeowners. You have small businesses around there, and you have a transportation system that's sort of self-sufficient. And this whole economy is self-sufficient on a smaller scale.
Right, but that's a longer term plan.
That is a long-term plan, but that needs to be the thinking. That needs to be the thinking going forward.
That needs to be the thinking overall.
Because the first step, you know, what's the cliche? The first step is to admit you have a problem. The first step has to be admitting that the Manhattan-centric model is dead. That rush hour is dead. That people crowding into big skyscrapers every single day from 9 to 5. I mean, we know in New York it's more like 9 to 7, but 9 to 5, it's dead. It's gone.
Right.
Not coming back anytime soon.
And that's also, but just take a step back. This whole Manhattan-centric notion, that everything is structured around servicing the Emerald City, where everyone wants to be, whether they reside there or are all businesses. That ship has sailed, and in fact, it started sailing a while ago, even after 9/11. Which, interestingly, a lot of these experts say, let's go back to what we did after 9/11 to bring the economy back. But if you look, particularly at the financial area, a lot of those businesses in the financial area left because 9/11 happened as technology, internet technology, and communications were improving. So it was easier for many firms to locate their back offices and other things elsewhere, which is why as they built up tourism and as they built up more of a residential aspect to downtown, now conveniently called FIDI for Financial District. So, so that's all well and good. So, but now we have a crash of far greater sort of systemic problems than we had on 9/11, and with the internet and everything else vastly improved from what it was 19 years ago, it's very easy to be anywhere. So, and if you look at Manhattan now, I mean, it's fascinating. In fact, in today's print, New York Times, they analyzed the post office change of address requests. They said that for the whole city, that the number of requests just for the month of April is more than double what the monthly average was before. And when they even analyzed it by the zip codes, it's like something like 3/4 of all of those requests came from Manhattan below 60th Street and from the gentrifying areas in Western Queens and Western Brooklyn along the East River. Those are all areas that were targeted for mega real estate development and these expensive houses, expensive apartment towers, and all of these other things. Those people all left. Many of them, particularly in Brooklyn, Queens, got tax breaks to build those buildings.
Yep.
It blew my mind to see apartment buildings going up in Brooklyn Heights, for example, where the least expensive studio apartment started at something like $800,000 with a 25-year tax break. I mean, this is, in other words, if you couldn't build something with a view of Manhattan looking over the East River from downtown Brooklyn without having to offer a 25-year tax break, maybe the economics of that development weren't worthwhile. So the point I'm making is this Manhattan-centric notion. We have to be aware of it. We hope Manhattan builds up again, but we're not going to fund the subways that way. So what Zach was getting at, and something I've talked about and we talked about this in the consequence of congestion pricing, because again, it's this whole notion that everybody wants to be in Manhattan. That's why congestion pricing is going to work. Now everybody's not going to come to Manhattan, but they still want to. They're still talking about this idea of putting tolls on the East River bridges and Manhattan below 60th Street to tax to toll. Same thing, taxing cars and trucks that are coming in to downtown Manhattan. And particularly for trucks making delivery, they were talking about, at least before, something like $25 a trip. That's a huge number to subsidize the trains that aren't going to be there. What we said was that, and also that they never offered any kind of alternative transportation. So what we had proposed, and we've said it many times, is that we have to start looking, this is long term now, at the creation of transit centers.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, not just selling out, changing the zoning, having special taxing districts, and letting more density allow in commercial areas that are near subway stops. What that would do is provide a feeder of tax revenue to the MTA. You could have parking. You would encourage people to come and park in these areas and leave their vehicles, so you don't have as much traffic on the road. You could make money from parking also. It would help the economy, because if all the MTA would have to do, or as we've said in the past before COVID, all the MTA had to do is say, you know what, we're putting a new station over there or faster service over there. All that real estate would rise in value. So if we have sort of more selective downtown areas, we could both diversify where all the people have to go. Maybe people wouldn't feel that they had to go running to Manhattan. There could be commercial space, back office space, and things like that. And it would also lift the value for others, people who may be homeowners or whatever, and rising, and of course, jobs in construction. So all of those things would help to pump the economy. And not to stop there. I'm not just talking about the subways. I grew up out in the burbs, out in Long Island. There are plenty of moribund downtown, quote unquote, downtown areas in areas along the Metro North, out on Long Island. I mean, if they were to change some of the zoning there, we could deal with both the affordable housing problem, with pump the economy, raise revenue to help support the subways, all of those things. And also deal with congestion, because you'll have less people in cars all trying to get to the same place. So
I'll give you viewers a little bit of inside baseball. I went to Hofstra University out in Hempstead, Long Island, and that's when Arthur and I started talking about this, back when I was in college, because that's what he said. He said, "Oh my gosh, look at what Hempstead could be." Yeah. Look at the downtown that they could create here. I mean, they already have the LIRR. They have, this sort of infrastructure already built. Look at what you could do. And then that sort of evolved to, let's take it more like, yes, the suburbs, but closer in to some of these outer boroughs. And it's sort of like the MTA has, first of all, they have the greatest monopoly in the world, which is transporting people in and around New York City, and they squandered it. Second of all, they have the greatest real estate company in the world, which is, as Arthur said, when they decide to put a new station in somewhere, the real estate skyrockets. They mismanage that. I mean, the level of ineptitude to screw up the greatest transportation and greatest real estate monopoly in the world is kind of hard to fathom. I mean, it's beyond criminal. But again, that's sort of like long-term type of thinking. The short-term type of thinking has to be, hold on a second. How do we restructure this organization to make it efficient? How do we find a way to get rid of this massive debt that we have without having, the middle class paying it off? Does that mean the Port Authority takes control of the agency? The New York City Economic Development Corporation takes control? Somebody needs to take control of this. and restructure it. What about the contracts? I mean, this is a hot button issue. Another cliche, third rail. But the MTA is very, 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 very generous when it comes to its labor contracts. And I don't look, if you sign a deal, it takes two sides to sign a deal, labor and management. So I don't want to hear people pointing the finger at labor when, management signed off on it. It goes both ways. But the point is, there's been a lot of waste and a lot of, let's just say, deals done not on the up and up. And we got to fix that. We have to find a way to fix that because this is not sustainable right now. But
in reality, though, and I don't want to tread on something, above our pay grade. But as far as the labor contracts, it's quite possible that because the governor and the elected officials do still have sway with the MTA. If the MTA board is told to make the deal, they may make a deal. So the managers on the MTA might not have. But again, the managers on the MTA are picked mostly by the governor. And the reality is, again, talking about who heads up these decision makers, it's mostly a lot of people that come out of the real estate industry or classes of people, big businesses and others that all have a vested interest in that status quo. But particularly the real estate industry, where the mantra is you build using other people's money. They always use the MTA as a way of adding value to their developments. So when you can put a nice, pretty station in a place, that adds to the value of the real estate. When you can extend the Second Avenue subway line, and especially when people know for decades where the next work is going to go, that adds to the value of the real estate. So that gets back to what we had mentioned over the long term. It's just come up with a good plan of where we're going to extend it, and figure out how we'll do it, and that will raise money, because the Second Avenue subway, that's Second Avenue is in Manhattan. The value of that, whether they extend it or not, or how much that costs, is going to take a long time. But the outer boroughs should not be subsidizing the Second Avenue subway.
No, not at all. And that's something particularly egregious, because before COVID, after they passed congestion pricing, before COVID hit, the only talk that regarded the outer boroughs was the bus service that they were going to cut. I mean, this is how corrupt the MTA is. They built a plan, or I shouldn't say they built it because it didn't happen yet, but they voted on a plan to tax the outer boroughs, and in return, they decided to cut their bus service. And so between the fact that 30 million Americans are out of work, doesn't even include all the Americans who had to take a pay cut, I am less sympathetic to already agreed upon union contracts. I'm sorry, that's just where I am right now in this COVID world. And you know what? I am very unsympathetic towards MTA management. And I just think that this is an organization that needs to be completely overhauled from the ground up. The old world is dead. This is the new world. If you'd like to be a part of it, that's great. But if not, step aside. This is how it is right now, because you and I live in New York City, have been here forever. We love this place. This city's in a lot of trouble right now. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it. Like, this city is in tremendous, tremendous trouble. And when the only ideas that are bandied about are, well, I guess we just need congestion pricing. And I guess we just need to find a way to tax the middle class more. get the hell out of here. Like, I'm done. I'm done with that stuff. And I think every single New Yorker should be done with it too.
Well, I think so too. And, we all have to start demanding that we think about how to do things better and do things differently. We've got to save the city, save the suburbs. Save the subways. The suburbs also have to be safe, because obviously if the city crashes, so does the whole notion of suburb. And yet again, if more businesses move out towards the suburbs are going to win anyway. The suburbs obviously have to do something about their zoning issue, which gets back to our idea with the create downtowns. We really have to come up with some better ways of doing things. But other thoughts.
Well,
I'm sorry, Zach, you were gonna...
No, yeah. Well, one thing is, and look, I'm not going to sit here and say this is going to solve their financial problems, but it would get them some revenue, and it would also show a gesture that they're thinking outside the box, and that is, selling advertising rights to stations, to lines. I mean, so I'm not taking the subway anytime soon, but when I do, it's usually either the E train or the F train. And at the end of the day, does that really matter? Like, would it really matter if it's the E train or the Coca-Cola train? The F train or the Bud Light train? Like, it's fine. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say like that sort of money would solve all their problems, but it would create revenue, and it would also be a gesture to New Yorkers like, hey, we're trying. We're trying to monetize everything we can. We know we don't want to raise fares so much, although I think maybe we should raise them a little bit. Obviously low income is low income, but raise it a little bit. But still, it's just like, here's something we're trying to do. We're going to try to squeeze every ounce of revenue we can without trying to hurt you and your bottom line. Gestures go a long way. Let's be honest. And something like that, to me, is a no-brainer.
So, certainly that's something to be considered. How about the closure? So they're closed now from what time to 1 a.m. to 5?
1 a.m. to 5 a.m.
To 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Certainly that's got to provide some savings. What think that should stay for the time being?
Let's put it this way. Right now, this is not the city that never sleeps anymore. This is not a 24/7 city anymore.
This is a city that sometimes sleeps.
This is a city that sometimes sleeps. This is. I'll tell you. I'm lucky that my favorite bar in the area, they reopened for takeout delivery only, obviously, but they reopened. They close at 9 o'clock now. They're open from 2 to 9, which is great. But that's the whole thing. No bars are staying open till 2 o'clock. You're not doing takeout delivery at 2 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the morning.
But the bigger issue is not so much the nightlife was a big issue, but a bigger issue is those who need to get to and from work, and hopefully I'd love to see the data on how that's working out now, but hopefully people can structure their work hours. And
a lot of the people who are working were still in the hospitality industry. I understand there are nurses. I understand nurses, doctors, hospital staff. They're 24/7. I get that, but that's a fraction of the New York City workforce, even during this time. So yes, as much as it pains me to say it, we do not need a 24/7 subway service for the foreseeable future. I can't wait until we need it again, but that's a long way off. And so I agree. It's definitely something that could be cut. And I think I think you have to wonder about, where does the private sector come in and lend a hand? I mean, we talk about the for-hire vehicles, Uber and Lyft, and they're more, disruptors, if you will. But what about private shuttle buses? We know companies already, before COVID, hired private shuttle buses for their employees. what about something like that? Again, I think that would really help if they were more like downtowns, closed circles. But I think that's something that maybe we should look at too. It's just like, how do we sort of substitute current transit service with something a little bit more leaner, smaller, leaner, something that might make more sense based on the current working habits of New Yorkers.
And that may well happen too. Is that having more access? Uber, Lyft, the others. That was certainly a model, but that gets very expensive, and particularly for commuters. Or for businesses that know that they want to, let's say a number of their workers live in a similar area, maybe they could send a little bus around for those who don't want to get on the subways. So, if something like that could be structured, and especially if some money maybe comes from that to help fund the MTA. I mean, don't forget they put a tax on the for-hire vehicle trips. For that would be Uber and Lyft about a year. When was that? In 2018, I think, in the budget of 2018. So so there was some money coming from that. So there's definitely things that can be done. So, but the MTA should not be treated like the poor stepchild, and should not be used as a tool to help enrich the value of those people that run that association, that run that agency. It has value because it exists. It has a monopoly. To some extent, that's been cut down by other things, Uber and Lyft, and even bicycles to some extent, City Bike and stuff. But it still has a value. It's still the go-to thing when one has to. So we should be promoting it, and but you can't keep bleeding it dry, and we can't keep mortgaging it, because and that's one of the reasons why we're in such trouble now. Again, before, not to arbor, but we keep raising congestion pricing, but the conceit of congestion pricing was they were going to use the expected income not as direct cash revenue, but to finance yet more bonds, about $15 billion in more bonds, when there was already about $38 billion outstanding. It's like, how much more debt? I mean, they were thinking of taking on all this additional debt before COVID hit. So we've got to really rethink that whole jam.
Seriously.
So but do it in a creative way. There are ways, like we said, all the MTA has to do is say, this is where we're going to extend the line. All of that property improves in value. And then related to that too, they have to have more seamless connections, like between the Long Island Railroad, for example, and
just between the
subway,
between the boroughs too.
Places, not to belabor it because we're running out of time, but creative things. They've been talking about Sunnyside Yards. If that could be a transportation hub with connecting all those lines, but with also parking, that could be a huge source if the profits from that go more directly into the subway instead of to the hands of the speculators.
And I think that's really, to end, I think that's really the point. That's the point we're trying to make. There is a great future out there for the MTA and for mass transit in general. I know there are a lot of people who are saying, oh my God, there's going to be a Carmageddon. Carmageddon, there you go. A Carmageddon. Yeah, I think people are going to, people who have a little bit of cash are probably going to get cars and what have you. But the future, and believe me, I'm not a public transportation advocate. The future of public transportation, I think, is very, very bright, provided they do it properly, provided they structure the agencies properly and have creative outside the box thinking about what it's going to look like and how it's going to be funded. But it's there's so many fantastic opportunities there that people want, that people are going to take advantage of. And so I think, if we could end on this positive note, it's just like, please, if you can, try to reiterate to the decision makers, the powers that be, that new thinking, please, not the same old nonsense, outside the box, creative, smaller scale. Let's do this. Let's have a public transportation system that matches the needs of the public. That's all we're asking for.
And doesn't just perpetuate the speculators who tried to make Manhattan the Emerald City and leave countless others in these transportation deserts.
Exactly.
And when you look at what's happening now and who's affected by COVID and who's affected by all of these other problems, it's been the MTA has been managed in a way that promotes the income the income discrepancies, and it's really something that has to change in a way that will make money to help run the system, and so make it run in a way that's fair and that will spin off money to help the system grow, serve more people, and lead to being more self-funding.
Mass transit for the masses, not the asses. We'll see you next. We'll see you next week. You're listening to a New York Truck Stop video.
I love
Stay
it.
safe.
Thanks.